Hey, June 4th, 2026, and today I wanted to talk about the SpaceX IPO. Now, normally I'm sitting at home on my computer and reading a script and everything, and it keeps my eyes focused on the screen. I'm using some AI video editing software, one called Descript. I don't know, the last video, it chopped up my voice pretty good though, so I figured I'll do more of this like freelancing or freewheeling videos. But a lot of this is, I guess, not new information. There's a lot of, I just want to share my opinion about the SpaceX IPO. So out of the gate, I feel it's overvalued. I agree with Morningstar. You know, Morningstar put it around 7.8 or $780 billion. I'm more in agreement with some other independent experts. It's more closer to 500 to 700 billion. You know, that they do have science, they do have products, they have the Starlink, which is quite remarkable. You know, it's they also have this other secure link or something, the military version of Starlink for the Defense Department. So they do have a legitimate business. The rockets landing upright are pretty good. You know, it's but you know, when you do the sum of the parts, and I've seen this, and I'll drop the links to these experts. You know, when you add up all the sum of the parts and value all of this remarkable technology, it's not 1.4, or I think Elon Musk is now looking for 1.75 trillion. He was looking for 2 trillion, then he came down to 1.8, and now it's 1.75 was the last number. So that in itself is not a good sign that he's so willing to give a discount, you know, off of his top line number. And you know, the Seeking Alpha experts, a lot of these independent experts on YouTube, you know, Morningstar, you know, which are mainstream, and they're probably being generous. I would say that the Wall Street valuations are probably, they're really trying to be generous because obviously they do business with these guys. You know, they're going to earn something off of this, so they don't want to totally lock themselves out. So they've got a game to play. But yeah, it's two different things. The quality of the company and what they're doing, and the valuation. You know, valuation is based on current and future earnings, potential earnings. You know, looking at all these things, like, you know, they have this payments from Anthropic for the Colossus data center at 1.4 trillion per month, and that drops down, and that'll offset some losses. The company lost 5 billion a year, so I might turn them to a profit. But let's say they are even at 12 billion a year profit, not revenue. Let's say 12 billion profit. And so the PE ratio, 20 times 12 billion is $240 billion, right? That's like a good, and that's like a normal PE ratio around 20. Like, or I would say one that's a good value. And then if you put it at double that, like 40 times PE, that would be like just under $500 billion. So that's even, I think this 500 billion is generous. So that's after all their expenses, all their research and development, paying all this staff, because this is not like printing NVIDIA microchips, which is like just Model T Fords. You know, once they get designed, they send it to TSM, print. Nothing needs to be customized. It's just straight assembly line stuff, or like printing MP3 files or whatever. This is hard work. This is like really hard technical work. These rockets blow up. There's a lot of fine tuning, a lot of moving parts. So yeah. And then, you know, the what are my thoughts about the Starlink, right? So this is internet from space. I'm here in Ukraine and back in Virginia Beach. I don't need it. You know, I'm living in an urban area. I'm living in a city. I got Cox cable for $60 a month in Virginia Beach, which is really high bandwidth. I can, you know, stream and do Microsoft Teams and play Counter-Strike. I don't play it, but it has enough bandwidth for that. Here in Ukraine, I got a service called Kopika, and it's $10 a month. And I can do everything. You know, I can, you know, stream and video game and all this. So why do I need Starlink? You know, I need to buy an antenna. I need to pay, I think it's around $150 a month here. I mean, it would just be like a flex. to have a Starlink thing hanging off my balcony. And it's like having an expensive car. It's just a flex. It's not really doing anything, so why would I need it, And I mean, how many third world people, like I guess Bedouin tribesmen, can buy Starlink, right? And then they can watch OnlyFans or something. But how many of those people are out there? Not enough to justify trillions of dollars. Maybe it's cool, and it's definitely going to bring internet to rural areas in America and stuff. But the thing is, 1% of the population every year is moving into the city, and the rural areas are dying out. So the long-term business case is not that strong. Not strong enough for, I mean, it's a strong business case if you're talking about, a few $100 billion valuation. But when you're talking about almost $2 trillion, what he was aiming for, let's discuss the meaning of a PE ratio. What does this valuation mean? So if you have something that has a PE ratio of 10, right, it would take you 10 years, so you buy a share for $100 and it's earning 100 or $10 a year. It takes you 10 years to get your money back. So if it has a PE ratio of 1,000, you're earning like, $10 a year or like $1 a year or 10 cents a year on 100. I don't know how to explain it, but let's say a PE ratio of 1,000. So you buy a share of a stock for $1,000 and it has a P ratio of 1,000. Even let's say, assuming it has earnings, right? Right now SpaceX doesn't have earnings, but let's say it has earnings and the PE ratio is $1,000. Something like Palantir is like 661. It would take you it earns $1 a year, free and clear. It would take you 1,000 years to get your money back, in theory. That's how you got to think about PE ratios. You buy an apartment for $100,000, it should earn you at least $10,000 a year at a 10. Now most apartments earn like 4% a year, 3% a year in America. Here in Ukraine it is like 10%. I think you can get 10% of your money back every year. It's going down. But that's how you got to think about it. You buy this and then, of course, they don't pay that money to you. It stays in the company. They might give out some dividend. They grow the company, and then you sell the stock. The share price goes up. Most of the stuff, tech stocks want to be around 35, or they'll grow to 35 PE. Some are even much higher, But yeah, so that's what you have to think about. And let's talk about the dot-com bust, right, and the internet. So you have Dan Ives, right? He's this fruitcake that's always on social media. He wears all this like loud clothes, gay clothes, whatever, and talks weird. We're in the second inning of the AI revolution. Jensen Huang is the godfather of AI, all this stuff, right? Well, they were talking like this about the dot-com era, back in the 90s. I'm 55. I was around for that. I had a front row seat to all of that, and I got burned pretty good because I was believing all the hype. It don't matter. The market can still crash in the second inning, and the technology will still go on. It's two different things, the stocks and what the company is doing. The company doesn't go bankrupt because the stock market crashes. So, your AOL and all your Cisco and all those stocks crashed. Amazon, they all crashed back then. But the best things happened to those companies after everyone else lost all their money. The Amazon took some 25 years to recover. But AWS and all this Prime and all this stuff came long after the 2000-2001 crash. All this stuff happened in 2010, long after. So even long after SpaceX crashes and all this AI crashes, the technology is going to advance. Maybe have some cash ready. Some powder dry to pick up all the pieces after this implosion happens. Because there's a lot of signals for it. This Iran war, it's not going to be in Venezuela. It's turning out to be a structural thing. And structurally, oil prices will be high. That'll press inflation. That'll cause a lot of fund managers to go to bonds. There'll be less money for stocks. There will be some kind of pullback, at least in a normal universe, unless they start printing money, which, that is possible. I'm not a guru here. This is not financial advice. But this is what's happened in the past. The railroad stocks crashed. It didn't mean the railroads went bankrupt. Actually, most of the tracks and most of the advancements in railroad technology happened long after the railroad crash. So the technology will continue to evolve long after the stocks crash. So don't if you're in and you made profits, I would I'll do a video on my defensive portfolio. I would start taking a defensive stance, rotate out of the techs, get into some Berkshire Hathaway, into some of these rating agencies like Morningstar and S&P. You know, they pay good dividends. There's something called Farmer Mac. You know, that's a strong dividend stock. You know, just dry powder, gold. You know, Bitcoin is out of favor. We'll do another one on Bitcoin, why I like Bitcoin now. I don't like Bitcoin when it's 100 grand, but you know, now it's looking okay. The other thing you have to watch out about these IPOs is that they have a lockup period of 6 months. Now, I think the SpaceX, you know, these guys got a lot of waivers, and these guys got a lot of favors from the agencies, maybe even from the government, you know, because Elon Musk is intertwined with Donald Trump. Now, I voted for Trump, just for the record. Mostly I liked him up until this Iran thing. The way he's handling this and got suckered into this by Netanyahu has kind of turned me off to him. You know, I wish we had Ron DeSantis in there, or somebody, you know, who's a little bit more sensible, Nikki Haley, or, you know, even Marco Rubio or JD Vance, you know, who could stand up to Israel a little bit more. You know, I mean, man, this is another sidetrack. What a mess we got dragged into. But anyway, so yeah, this SpaceX has a huge political advantage. But the thing is, after 6 months, insiders, and I think the people, early investors and everything, they're allowed to sell. And $2 trillion, you know, let's say that they got in at like pennies on the dollar, dimes on the dollar. These people, of course, they're going to sell. They would rather have millions of dollars in the bank and able to buy a mansion, send their kids to, you know, private school in Connecticut, and later, you know, all this kind of stuff, and maybe ride on, you know, some of this space tourism and, you know, whatever. They need money for all that stuff, yachts and all this kind of stuff. And maybe that's where the money will be, is in luxury. You know, there'll be a huge surge in luxury purchases. This Ferrari stock might be something to look at, you know, after they did that woke electric car. But, you know, that's just a blip. That's not the company didn't change their whole direction. So that might actually be an opportunity. And there might be all this money from these, what I call the insane 3 IPOs, because these companies have no earnings. They're just, they're really good manipulating the government and manipulating agencies. But, you know, Anthropic, SpaceX, and OpenAI, the insane 3. You know, $1 trillion of nothing. Yeah, so after that lockup period, they will be able to dump. Now, the other big scandal in this SpaceX, you're going to anyway get these shares. If you have any kind of pension fund, 401k, unless you're in like Denmark. I think Denmark is the only one that's making sure that they're not connected to this. I haven't heard from Norway yet. But you're going to get this because they get immediate inclusion into the indexes. You know, so what is an index? An index is a basket of stocks. So they have like this VOO for the S&P 500, Vanguard, VOO, or they have the QQQ for the NASDAQ. So those are like a whole bunch of tech companies that the fund manager, they have criteria. They have to have been on the market at least 6 months. They have to have good earnings, good reputation, certain market cap. So they bypass that 6-month rule and they immediately go in the index. And a lot of pension funds hold these indexes, index funds, I should say. And they will be forced to buy SpaceX, or when they buy this QQQ, it'll already be bought for them through the fund managers that they work with. But anyway, it's kind of like a pension fund robbery. It's just really unethical. Now, sure, I don't mind if it makes money. If they were doing this at $500 billion, I would be, yeah, who cares? You know, that's life, right? Now I care, right? Because they're taking pension money at a very inflated valuation. It's okay if you do it, I guess, do this kind of criminality at a lower valuation where people could, the public could stand to gain. But they're basically robbing old ladies and firemen and teachers and everything to fund rockets to Mars. And that's another thing I have big issue with. If you read the SpaceX S1, it reminds me a lot of L. Ron Hubbard's book, Dianetics, you know, about space aliens, and, you know, lizard people and all this other stuff that they believe in, you know, Scientologists believe in. You know, I don't want to get sued by them, but it reads a lot like that. You know, so Yeah, I mean, I have Tesla shares. I have a lottery position in Tesla, like some 25 shares or something like that. I just hold on to that because there's a lot of talk that SpaceX will merge up Tesla, or you'll get they'll trade your Tesla share 1-to-1 if the valuations are similar. Tesla for SpaceX, so I would just sit on that. I mean, like, we're all waiting on Tesla for the self-driving. And like I said, I have nothing against the science. If they pull off self-driving, fully autonomous vehicles with just the cameras and not putting all this extra crap on the car, like all these radars and lasers and all this other stuff, and they can do it just with a camera, that's a revolution. Self-driving is really going to be something. It'll be absolutely remarkable. I'm here in the woods of Lviv. I like being in the woods. It's really peaceful here. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the SpaceX IPO. Interesting science, landing the rocket upright. That is absolutely impressive. Starlink, and actually more to this other one for the Defense Department, SecureLink, I think they call it. Absolutely needed technologies. If we can get everyone online and get everyone interconnected and make it easier for people to communicate, get access to information, especially like in Iran and Russia, right? If they could get unblocked internet, if they could do Starlink without these receivers, that you just get it from your phone. And that's the other thing. The countries that need it the most, they shouldn't be charged. You're not going to charge an Iranian person who wants to organize a coup against the current regime $100 a month, right? They don't have any money. So I guess that'll come out of the U.S. government pocket, but that's okay, because then, that'll be paid back with cheap oil from a friendly regime. But the people who need it most can't really pay for it. And it has to be done. The Starlink technology has to go a step further and be done without the receivers. The data centers in space, like I said, that's part of this. This is all, and 1 million people on Mars. This is like, this is great for if they can make a book and sell science fiction and stuff like that. I mean, they're probably going to make $1 million on that book. So 1 million times, let's say, a 40 PE, 400 million. You're nowhere near this trillions of dollar valuation. So just to give you an idea of what the numbers are, a trillion is 1,000 billion. A billion is 1,000 million. So a trillion is 10,000 million dollars. If you have $10,000 million, you have $1 trillion. So it's just like a lot of money. So yeah, I would sidestep this. This is not financial advice. This is just my opinion. I'm just some random guy walking in the woods in Ukraine, who happened to work at BlackRock long back, and been investing in stocks since I was 15, and got a 2-year-old. that distracts and occupies all my time. So when I do get some free time to think about this, and then here you are. These are my thoughts. So anyway, give me a like and subscribe. I need to get up to 10 subscribers ASAP. And let's do this. Let's make a community and talk about this. I really like the tech stocks. My friend in Sweden is really good on the value stocks and natural gas stocks. I need some friends that are good in the retail sector, that understand retail stocks, someone who understands bonds, in all these different ways, someone who understands leveraged ETFs, and we can do something. Anyway, take care and bye-bye.